The back hallway smelled like dust and failure. It was too hot in Grandma's house. Always too hot. Thanksgiving Day. And I was sweating through the ugly, deep purple wool sheath dress I wore, only because Aunt Carol had once commented it made my shoulders look thin. It was a uniform for war. I'd slipped away from the dining room crowd 5 minutes earlier, needing air that didn't smell like cheap cranberry sauce and stale bourbon. I was already exhausted. 4 hours in, and the performance had worn me thin. I walked past the coat closet, heading toward the kitchen pantry, the only place I knew where the windows sometimes cracked open, letting in the sharp, clean November cold. That's when the hand clamped down on my arm. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was possessive, the kind of grip that meant to stop you dead, bruising the soft underside of the triceps. I didn't flinch. Not anymore. My heart rate jumped, but my face stayed blank. Years of practicing the mask. Years of sitting through the subtle insults, the blatant lies, the family history rewritten in front of my face until I questioned if the sky was actually blue. The hand belonged to Carol. Of course it did. She wore a heavy gold watch that dug into my skin. The watch was overkill, big and chunky, like everything else about her. She'd spent the last hour leaning into Grandma, talking about her new condo in Boca Raton, making sure everyone saw how successful she was. Carol smiled. It wasn't a good smile. It was the kind that stretched the skin too tight over her jaw, showing the faint yellow tint on her teeth from years of too much iced tea. "Diana, so glad I caught you." Her voice was low, conspiratorial, but sharp enough to cut through the muffled sounds of Uncle Joe yelling about football scores down the hall. My phone was heavy in the left pocket of the purple dress. I didn't reach for it. I didn't have to. The habit had started 5 years ago, after the incident with the missing jewelry box, which I was falsely accused of taking until Mom finally found it under Carol's bed 2 weeks later, pretending she'd forgotten it was there. After that, anytime I walked into a family gathering, I didn't just mute the phone. I hit record, audio only, volume down, screen locked. I had a little app that bypassed the 3-minute recording limit. It was set to record for 4 straight hours, or until I manually stopped it. The memory stick was full of these dead audio files. The sound of plates clanking, the slow drawl of Uncle Dave's snoring, Carol's high-pitched fake laugh. They were my insurance policy, my proof against the madness. I felt the familiar click in my stomach, the cold, solid knowledge that the conversation we were about to have was being documented. Every breath, every lie, every smug syllable. "Aunt Carol," I said flatly, "did you need something? I was just trying to find some ice." "Oh, honey." She squeezed my arm, patronizing. The gold watch dug deeper. "You don't need ice. You need a reality check, and maybe a little wisdom from your favorite aunt." She pulled me tighter, dragging me the few extra steps into the dark, narrow passage that led only to the seldom-used laundry room. This spot was perfect for her. Hidden, bad lighting. Nobody ever came back here unless the washing machine exploded. She released my arm, stepping back just enough to look me up and down. Her perfume, something expensive and aggressively floral, filled the stale air. "You know, I was talking to Granny earlier today," she began. She always called Grandma Granny when she wanted to sound affectionate and manipulative at the same time. "She's having such a tough time. The arthritis, you know. And the memory." I leaned my shoulder against the chipped, peeling paint of the wall. I stayed silent. Let her talk. That was rule number 1 of the recording game. Minimize your input. Maximize theirs. It's a lot of work, Diana. A real lot of work. Calling her 3 times a day, making sure she remembers her pills, driving her to those silly bridge games. Carol sighed dramatically, touching the diamond studs in her ears. "We have to make sure she's taken care of, don't we?" "She seems fine," I offered. It was a neutral statement, but Carol's face darkened instantly. "She seems fine to you because you see her for 3 hours on Christmas and Thanksgiving, Diana. I'm talking about the day-to-day, the real burden." She laced her fingers together, tilting her head. "And you know what Granny and I have been discussing recently?" I shrugged. My mouth felt dry. The heat of the house was making my scalp itch beneath my hair. I focused on the faint, whirring sound of the refrigerator unit cycling on in the kitchen, a sound that I hoped wasn't loud enough to muddy the audio file. "The will," Carol breathed out, like it was a secret so heavy it might crack the plaster. I felt a genuine, cold stab of panic. Grandma wasn't failing, but she was 91. We all knew the clock was ticking. The house, the small portfolio of stocks, it wasn't millions, but it was enough to make the family turn vicious. And the family was vicious. "She's making some changes," Carol continued, her voice dropping lower, full of false sympathy. "It's hard, Diana. She loves you, she really does. But she needs to be practical." I pushed off the wall. Practical about what? Carol stepped closer, invading my personal space. I could smell the faint, sour scent of the red wine she'd been drinking during appetizers. "About your complete lack of involvement, sweetie." She patted my cheek, a quick, insulting tap. "Look, I love you. You're my niece. But Granny has to reward the people who actually show up, the people who sacrifice their time, the people who are responsible." She paused, letting the word responsible hang heavy in the air. The implication was clear. I was not responsible. I was the flaky niece who lived 3 states away and only called every other Sunday. "You know how she is about that money," Carol whispered. Leaning in so close her heavy earrings brushed my neck. It felt invasive and dirty. "She thinks inheritance is earned, not given. And she told me just last week that she was very disappointed about how often you miss those doctor appointments. The ones I call you about, remember?" My blood went cold. I had tried 5 times in the last year to fly back for her checkups. But every single time, Carol would call me 24 hours before my flight, panicking, saying, "Oh, Diana, don't bother, we had to reschedule." Or, "Granny is having a bad day, she doesn't want visitors." Only for me to find out later that the appointment had gone exactly as planned, and Carol had just used the opportunity to tell Grandma how hard it was to get a hold of me. Gaslighting. That was the word. She created the lie, forced the situation, and then pointed to the outcome as proof of my failure. "I was busy, Aunt Carol. With work," I lied smoothly. I wasn't going to correct her history now. That was a fight for later. Carol chuckled, a low, dry sound that grated on my nerves. "Of course you were, darling. But Granny doesn't see that. She just sees that you weren't there. And I made sure she saw that." My fingers instinctively curled into fists inside my pockets, brushing against the smooth glass of the phone. The little red dot, unseen, was still recording. "You made sure?" I asked. My voice was dangerously quiet. Carol took the bait, giddy with her own power. This was what she wanted, to confess her crime to the victim, secure in the knowledge that the victim had no recourse. "Oh yes, I had a little chat with her lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He's a dear. He handles everything. And I explained to him that, given your distance and your volatile nature, it would be much cleaner, much simpler, if the estate was handled between myself and your brother Todd. We're the stable ones, Diana. The local ones." A wave of nausea hit me. I closed my eyes for a second, fighting the urge to vomit right there on Grandma's ugly shag carpet. Todd was useless. He'd spend his inheritance on a boat and file for bankruptcy 6 months later. Carol knew this. This wasn't about stability. It was about consolidation. "So you're saying I'm completely cut out?" I asked. I needed the concrete language. I needed the evidence to be undeniable. Carol's smile widened, triumphant. "Completely. All the liquid assets, the house, the vacation lot in Maine, all going to Todd and me. Clean split. She signed the papers last Tuesday." She leaned in again, her eyes shining with malicious pleasure. "She wanted to give you that small silver locket, the one with the blue stone, but I told her you probably already lost it. You always lose things, don't you? That's going to me too. The locket wasn't valuable, but it had belonged to my grandfather. It was the only thing I had ever specifically asked for. The betrayal was a physical weight, settling cold and heavy in my chest. This wasn't just about money. It was about years of carefully constructed narrative designed to isolate me. She hadn't just manipulated the will. She had stolen the last shred of my history. I focused hard on the feeling of the smooth phone beneath my fingers. I willed the microphone to catch the next words perfectly. "And you think nobody will believe this?" I asked. keeping my tone perfectly level, bordering on weak. I needed her to seal the deal. Carol threw her head back and laughed. It was a loud, rattling, horrible sound, completely out of place in the quiet hallway. It sounded like dry leaves being dragged across concrete. Believe what, Diana? That I, the devoted daughter who has been caring for Granny for 5 years, managed to convince a 90-year-old woman to be financially prudent? Honey, I didn't even have to convince her that hard. She sees you. She sees how you just drift through life. She lowered her voice again, suddenly serious, but the smugness remained. If you even think about opening your mouth, I will tell everyone, and I mean everyone, that you tried to steal that locket when you were here last summer. I'll say you're lying about the will because you're emotionally unstable and greedy. Who do you think they'll believe? Me, the one who brings Grandma warm soup 3 times a week? Or you, the crazy niece who only shows up for the free food? She poked me hard in the collarbone with a manicured finger. The nail was painted a deep, inappropriate crimson. You're out, kid. Accept it. Stay quiet, be polite, and maybe I'll send you some of the ugly porcelain figurines we don't want. That's the best you're going to get. She took a step back, folding her arms, radiating victory. She looked completely relaxed, entirely finished. She thought she had won the whole game right here in the dusty hall, and that I was utterly defeated, paralyzed by her threat. I looked past her, toward the faint stream of light coming from the dining room. I could hear the clink of silverware, the hum of normal life continuing, oblivious to the assassination that had just taken place 10 feet away. My mouth curved into a small, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. It felt like a mask of plaster cracking, but I held it. I tilted my head, looking her straight in the eye. I didn't blink. That's good to know, Carol, I said softly. She blinked, surprised by my lack of expected hysterics. Is that all you have to say? No, I said. I paused, letting the silence stretch, thick and uncomfortable. I could feel the plastic of the phone charger port rubbing against my thumbnail. The recording dot was still burning, silently logging every inhale and exhale. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale, oppressive air. I let it out slowly, pushing away the physical panic. I was just thinking, I continued, my voice now perfectly measured, cold as stone. It's kind of awful how hot this old house gets when it's so crowded. Carol frowned, her expression shifting from triumphant malice to confusion. She had expected tears, shouting, a confession of defeat. She didn't understand the sudden banality, the shift in tone. What are you talking about? The heat? Yeah, I said, shrugging, turning to walk past her, back toward the sound of the party. I needed to get out of the hall before I threw up or screamed. It's weird how some parts of the house just hold onto the heat, isn't it? Like the air gets trapped, heavy, and it just never moves. It settles in the corners. I walked away, leaving her standing alone in the darkness of the laundry hall. The audio file was over 3,000 words long, and every single one of them was solid, undeniable proof. I didn't stop until I was standing next to the back door, where the cold draft from the weather stripping finally hit my skin. I took my hand out of my pocket, sliding the phone up my sleeve. The glass was warm from the heat of my body. I could feel Carol's eyes burning into the back of my neck from the hallway. She thought she had crushed me. She thought she had won. She didn't know the heat wasn't the only thing trapped in the corners. The air by the door was thin and sharp. It was the only clean air in the whole house. A house thick with the smell of too many people and too much cheap gravy. I kept the phone against my wrist, the warmth a strange comfort, a little burning brick of proof. I didn't turn around. Carol wasn't worth the eye contact yet. I stayed there, just watching the dead brown leaves plastered against the backsliding glass. They looked brittle, like paper cutouts. I listened to the sounds of the house. Uncle Greg complaining loudly about the lion's defense. My cousin Lisa shushing a baby in the dining room. The faint, rhythmic scrape of the dishwasher starting up. A sound of ending, of cleanup, of pushing the mess away until next year. But the mess was staying this time. I slid my hand slowly out of my pocket, feeling the denim snagging on my knuckles. I wasn't cold anymore. I was stone. I knew I needed to get out of sight, away from the immediate heat of Carol's victory lap. I pushed off the doorframe and moved toward the kitchen counter, where a bottle of cheap Pinot Noir was sweating condensation onto the laminate. I poured a glass. Too much, right to the rim. My hand was steady. That surprised me. Usually the adrenaline made me shake, made me spill things, made me look exactly like the unstable, hysteric Carol had always painted me to be. Not tonight. Tonight, I was the camera. Smooth. Recording. I leaned against the kitchen island. I could feel the vibrations of the conversation coming up through the soles of my boots. Everyone was talking around me, through me, ignoring me, which was exactly what I wanted. I took a slow sip of the wine. It tasted like chemicals and disappointment. I looked down at my phone again. The little red light, the little timer counting up. It had been running for an hour and 14 minutes. It had captured the entire ugly exchange. Carol had been specific. She hadn't just implied it. She had bragged. She signed the papers last week, Diana. All clean. You get nothing. I told her you were a burden, an unreliable mess. She finally listened. Who are you going to tell? They think you're crazy. They've always thought you were crazy. The sound of her laughter, high-pitched and metallic, was sealed tight inside the memory chip. Proof of malicious intent. Proof of undue influence. Proof that the sweet, kind grandmother who had always promised me security had been manipulated by the woman she trusted most. I kept drinking the wine, watching my aunt from across the room. She was talking to my mother now, a sickeningly sweet smile plastered on her face, probably detailing some minor tragedy from her commute, acting the martyr. Carol was wearing a heavy wool dress, the color of dried blood, and a ridiculous silver brooch shaped like a cat. She looked comfortable. Too comfortable. I watched her adjust the cat brooch. That's when the strategy clicked into place. I wasn't going to mention the recording. Not now. Not during the chaos of a holiday. I was going to use the silence Carol had imposed on me for years, as my greatest weapon. I finished the wine and set the glass down hard enough that it made a wet, final thunk. I had to get out of that house before the performance cracked. I'm heading out, I called, voice flat. Not loud enough for everyone. Just loud enough for Mom and Carol to catch. Mom looked up, flustered. Already, sweetie? You haven't had pie. I have an early morning, I lied, pulling my heavy parka off the coat rack near the laundry room door. The weight of the coat felt good, solid. Carol turned slowly, that smug smile still fixed. Running off, Diana? Don't forget your leftovers. Oh, wait. You don't have a Tupperware with your name on it, do you? She thought it was a playful jab about the will, a little reminder that I was out. I zipped the coat up high. The phone was safe, pressed between my hip and the leather lining of the pocket. I met her eyes. No fear, no tears, just a blank, steady stare. I won't forget anything, Carol, I said. Trust me. I didn't wait for a response. I walked right out the back door, ignoring Mom's weak call of, "Drive safe." The cold hit me like a physical punch, sharp and clean. I breathed deep, pine needles and damp earth. I didn't turn my phone off until I was parked outside my tiny, sad apartment building 40 minutes later. I sat in the dark car, the engine idling, the heater blowing stale air on my face. I pulled the phone out. The screen showed a final recording time of 1:21:58. I hit stop. The silence in the car was deafening. I didn't listen to it right away. I didn't need to. The words were burned into my memory. Carol's voice, clear as a bell, confirming every ugly suspicion I had carried for a decade. I went upstairs, locked the door, and didn't touch the file until 7 a.m. sharp on Monday morning. Monday morning was gray and wet, the kind of day where the sky looked like dirty laundry. I was dressed in the most professional, boring clothes I owned. Black slacks, a button-down shirt that was too stiff, and a pair of sensible, uncomfortable heels. I looked like a person with a plan. I sat at my kitchen table, headphones clamped over my ears, listening to the file. I listened 3 times. Once for the content, once for the context, and a third time just to hear Carol's arrogant, confident voice confirming her guilt. I saved the file under 3 different names, uploaded it to 2 cloud services, emailed it to a burner address. I was taking no chances. If the phone was destroyed, the evidence had to live on, everywhere. Then I called the office of Franklin and Rhodes. They specialized in estate law. They handled ugly family fights. I need to discuss undue influence in a last testament, I told the receptionist, my voice steady. It's urgent. I have documentation. The documentation was Carol's voice. And the documentation was my grandmother, Helen, already in hospice care, fading fast. There was no time to wait. I got an appointment for 11:30 a.m. The office of Mr. Rhodes smelled like expensive leather and old money. The carpet was thick, and the silence was profound. Mr. Rhodes was a man in his 60s, tired eyes, sharp suit, and the air of someone who had seen every possible way a family could destroy itself over property. I sat across from him, placed the phone on his huge mahogany desk, and hit play. He listened, expressionless, for the crucial 2 minutes of Carol's admission. The audio quality was imperfect, a little muffled by the pocket material, a little background noise from the Thanksgiving din, but Carol's words were undeniable. When the clip ended, Mr. Rhodes picked up the phone, studied the timestamp, and looked at me. That was recorded when the deceased was still alive, correct? Yes. Thanksgiving Day. Last Thursday. And your grandmother, Mrs. Helen Pritchard, is currently incapacitated? She is. Carol, my aunt, had her sign the revised will last week. Carol stated on this recording that she convinced Grandma I was a burden and that I was cut out completely. Rhodes nodded slowly, steepled his fingers, and finally, a hint of professional satisfaction flickered in his eyes. Ms. Pritchard, this is a clean case of undue influence. It's not hearsay. It's an admission of guilt. We move immediately to invalidate the revised will based on coercion. The words felt like a physical release. A decade of fighting against whispers and lies had just been validated by a tired, expensive lawyer. What do we do first? I asked. We draft the suit, of course, Rhodes said, pulling a yellow legal pad toward him. But first, we inform your Aunt Carol. We send a formal letter today, a certified letter, so she has to sign for it. It will state simply that we have proof of malicious intent and that the revised will is being formally challenged on grounds of coercion and undue influence. He paused, looking at the ceiling, thinking, we don't mention the recording yet. Not specifically. We let her panic first. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, signatures, and silence. Carol had not called me. Why would she? She thought I was crushed, probably nursing my feelings back in my lonely apartment, just like always. Grandma Helen died 4 days later, quietly, in her sleep, early Tuesday morning. The funeral was simple and small. Carol was radiant, dressed in elegant black, accepting condolences with the solemn air of the grieving daughter who was also the executor. I wore my stiff black suit and stood in the corner, a ghost. Carol glanced at me once, a quick, dismissive flash of her eyes, confirming I was still relegated to the outskirts of the family circle. She didn't know the bomb I had already sent flying toward her mailbox. The certified letter had arrived the day before the funeral. The will reading was set for Friday, 3 days after the funeral. It was a formal affair held in the same office building where I had met Mr. Rhodes, but in a neutral conference room reserved by the estate lawyer handling Grandma Helen's original documents, a man named Mr. Thompson. The room was clinical: 1 long table, 6 leather chairs, a pitcher of ice water, and a box of tissues that I knew, deep down, was meant for Carol. Present were Mom, Uncle Greg, Carol, Carol's daughter Lisa, and me. Mr. Thompson sat at the head of the table, looking grave. "Thank you all for coming," he began, shuffling a stack of thick, creamy paper, the last will and testament of Helen Pritchard. Carol radiated quiet authority. She caught my eye and offered the tiniest, almost imperceptible smirk. She was ready for the moment she would be confirmed as the main beneficiary, the faithful daughter. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Before I read the official document, I must address an unusual and unfortunate complication." Carol stiffened slightly. Mom looked confused. "My office was contacted by counsel for Ms. Diana Pritchard," he nodded to me, "concerning the validity of the revised will signed by Mrs. Pritchard on October 28th. The air in the room went cold. Carol's face didn't move, but her posture froze, rigid. The challenge asserts that the deceased was subject to undue influence at the time of signing the revision. This challenge is based on direct evidence of malicious intent and coercion. Carol found her voice. It was a low, dangerous hiss. That's absurd. Diana has always been jealous. She's unstable, frankly. Carol? Uncle Greg murmured. Let him finish. Thompson didn't even look at Carol. He continued, because of the compelling nature of the evidence provided. What evidence? Carol demanded, her voice rising sharply. Thompson calmly reached into a thin folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a legal document. It was a formal notice of discovery. Ms. Diana Pritchard's counsel has submitted an audio recording, time-stamped November 23rd, 2023, Thanksgiving Day, at approximately 7:15 p.m., which includes dialogue directly detailing the process by which Mrs. Pritchard was coerced into altering her last testament, along with explicit statements of intent by the party responsible for the influence. Carol's carefully constructed composure shattered. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a plaster statue. Her jaw slackened. She looked at me, a wild, panicked look replacing the smugness. She remembered the hallway. She remembered the laughter. She remembered me standing by the door, quiet, the phone warm in my pocket. You, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You didn't. I stared back at her. I didn't say a word. I just let the silence of the conference room answer for me. Thompson went on, clinical and detached. Given the severity of the claim, the revised will has been temporarily set aside by court order. We will proceed with the reading of the original will, dated 2010, until this matter is resolved through litigation. He reached for the thick document. Carol pushed her chair back violently, the screech of the metal legs against the carpet piercing the silence. She was breathing hard, shallow, fast gasps. You recorded me? At Thanksgiving? I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. Still, I said nothing. I didn't need to. The phone had already spoken. Thompson began to read, his voice droning out the specific legal jargon of the 2010 document. He listed minor bequests to Mom and Uncle Greg, and then he arrived at the residual estate. The remainder of the estate, including the primary residence located at 144 Oak Street, and all liquid assets, shall be divided equally between the deceased's two daughters, Carol Pritchard, and, he paused, turning the page, and her granddaughter, Diana Pritchard. Thompson looked up, confirmed the names, and continued reading the specifics of the trust. Carol didn't hear the rest. She was staring at me, her eyes wide, glistening with tears of pure, venomous rage. Not grief, just the loss of her carefully planned spoils. She had already spent that house in her mind. You witch, she spat, her voice cracking. You ruined everything. She stood up, trembling, knocked her chair over, and stumbled toward the door. She was sobbing now. Great, messy, humiliating sobs, the kind she always accused me of throwing. I will sue you into the ground. You can't use that. It's illegal. It's... Thompson looked up from the will, finally addressing her. Mrs. Davies. In this jurisdiction, conversations are often one-party consent. Your attorney will confirm that. Carol stopped dead in the doorway. One-party consent. She hadn't known. Of course, she hadn't. She had been too arrogant, too confident in my history of silence. She turned back toward me one last time, her face blotchy, utterly stripped of dignity. I watched her, breathing evenly. I felt the decades of gaslighting, the small, constant cuts, the deliberate public humiliation, all of it lifting away, dissolving like smoke. I finally spoke, my voice low and steady, cutting across the sudden, horrified silence of the room. You should have checked the settings, Carol. She didn't move. She just stood there, framed in the doorway, staring at the granddaughter she thought she had erased. She looked small. She looked defeated. She looked like she had just realized she wasn't the victor. She was just the exhibit. Thompson continued reading the distribution percentages, his voice flat and professional, as Carol Pritchard, the woman who had spent Thanksgiving bragging about destroying me, crumpled against the doorframe.